Eric Bieniemy has been one of the best offensive coordinators for one of the best offenses in football for about 2 years now. But it seems that we have gone another year without him being seriously considered for a head coaching job. See, on the surface, this makes no sense. Traditionally successful offensive coordinators tend to have no issue finding jobs. Freddie Kitchens, Kevin Stefanski, Matt Nagy, Mike Vrabel, and Anthony Lynn were all hired with less coordinator experience and success than Eric Bieniemy had. This has led to many questioning the equality of the NFL's hiring practices when it comes to race in recent years, since Eric Bieniemy is a black man. And in the last 4 years, there has been 26 NFL head coach job openings, and only 4 of those spots have been filled by black head coaches, despite the NFL having a majority player base that is African American. The disposition of this number and the lack of interest in black head coaching candidates has a lot of people justifiably questioning if race is related. So today, we're going to break down the last 4 years of head coaching hirings to see if Eric Bieniemy is being overlooked as a head coaching candidate or if the data suggests that he is exactly where he should be. So let's take a look into it. Now, before we jump into the numbers, there are a few common arguments about Bieniemy that I'd like to quickly address. The first one is good coordinators don't always make good coaches. Now, yes, on the surface, without any context, this statement is correct, but it's completely irrelevant in the context of this conversation. This is a conversation about whether Eric Bieniemy as a head coach candidate is qualified enough to have gotten a job by now. Not a question about whether he would be a good head coach. Those have completely different parameters to find out. That is a question of something that we are not even trying to answer at this point. What we are trying to answer is the question of, should Eric Bieniemy be a head coach with the resume that he currently has? Is his resume good enough to have gotten a job by now? So the statement about good offensive coordinators don't always make great head coaches is irrelevant in this conversation. Although if you look at it without the context of this conversation, it is true. The second question is, the Andy Reid factor, right? Is Andy Reid too domineering of an offensive mind? And is Andy Reid the one calling plays, or is he not? I think play calling when it comes to hiring a head coach should be irrelevant. I don't think it should matter. And if you look at the coaching decisions that were made because they thought somebody was a great play caller, for the Browns fans that watch this channel, the last 2 head coaching decisions were made before Stefanski because somebody was a great play caller, and Hugh Jackson and Freddie Kitchens, and we saw that did not equal great coaching. So those things I don't think are really considered when bringing in a head coach, whether he's a great play caller or not. So whether he called plays or not is irrelevant, and there is evidence to just suggest that he has called plays. But again, you're never going to find out the concrete truth of that. And the second reason why it doesn't matter is that why would it matter if he called plays when it didn't matter for Matt Nagy? Why are some of these circumstances mattering more for Eric Bieniemy than it did for Matt Nagy, who wasn't objectively as good as Eric Bieniemy at his job as Eric Bieniemy has showed himself to be? That is a huge question to answer. And it's not just Matt Nagy. We can go back to Doug Peterson. Why is it important for Eric Bieniemy when it wasn't important for, Doug Peterson? These are all things that need to be answered when we're talking about the fairness of NFL hiring practices. Those things, those little quick arguments that people like to throw out in this conversation about Eric Bieniemy, I just don't buy them. At the end of the day, they don't ring true from what I know about football from a numbers perspective and what I've seen in football as a viewer and as a spectator. So no, I don't think these arguments are the reason why Bieniemy is being held back. Now, let's actually look at the data to see if there's something there that suggests that Eric Bieniemy should not be a head coach by now. Okay, so I went through the last 4 years of NFL head coaching hires and charted each coach's head coaching experience, coordinator experience, how they ranked in their specialized field, how much better they were than the guy they took over for, and lastly, total NFL coaching experience. And this gave me a good idea of what a relative resume looks like for an NFL head coach hire in the last 4 years. So here's how these numbers break down. Of all of the 26 head coaching hires that have happened in the NFL in the last 4 off seasons, 18 have had an offensive background, while 8 have had a defensive background. So the advantage goes to coaches with an offensive background. The least likely kind of coach to be hired is a college head coach. Only 2 have been hired in the last 4 years. Then 3 coaches were hired without any coordinator experience. Then there were 6 former defensive coordinators that were hired and 7 former head coaches. And the most hired group of all was offensive coordinators, which there were 8 hired. So again, being an offensive coordinator is seen as the most desirable thing that can be on a resume as of recent hiring trends. Now, of those 8 offensive coordinators, 6 of them were hired after having seasons ranked in the top 10 offensive DVOA. The only 2 that were not were Kevin Stefanski this year in 2020, ranked 13th with the Vikings, and Matt LaFleur in 2019, ranked 16th with the Tennessee Titans. So being an offensive coordinator of a top 10 offense is seen as the single most desirable resume feature among all head coaching hires in the last 4 years. That is the one single thing that owners and search firms have looked for. The amount of success that an offensive coordinator has had, is he a top 10 guy? And those guys tend to get hired the most. There are 6 of them that have that trait in common. That would be just behind defensive coordinators as a total group and head coaches as a total group. So it's a very significant thing if somebody is the offensive coordinator of a top 10 offense when it comes to being hired in the NFL, at least with the trends of the last 4 years. Now, this brings me to Eric Bieniemy, who has 2 years of coordinator experience, which is noteworthy because there have been 7 head coach hires with the same or less experience. Eric Bieniemy is also coming off of coaching the 5th ranked offense per DVOA. Only Sean McVay and Kyle Shanahan were hired after having better ranked seasons than Bieniemy. Eric Bieniemy's 5th ranked offense is also 2 spots better than the Bears head coach Matt Nagy, which is significant because Matt Nagy is the guy who was the offensive coordinator before Eric Bieniemy in Kansas City under Andy Reid. Now, at this point, it's starting to become clear to some that based on the standard that the NFL owners have set themselves by their hiring practices in the last 4 years, that Eric Bieniemy is being overlooked by those standards. He is not just qualified, he is in the elite tier of qualified offensive coordinator hires. Now, if you take all the offensive coordinator, head coach hires, and you add all of their experience up and you add all of their, DVOA rankings up, and you divided it by the number of offensive coordinators that have been hired, you will find that the most average offensive coordinator, the most average guy to get hired in the NFL, and the most likely guy to get hired in the NFL is an offensive coordinator with 2 years of experience and the 8th ranked DVOA offense. Now, Bieniemy is clearly above that line. He has the 2 years of experience. He has a higher ranked offense than 8th. He had the 5th this year. The only thing that you can argue is that he doesn't have the amount of NFL coaching experience that a lot of candidates have. He only has 7 years of coaching experience. Now, that may seem significant, the amount of total coaching experience, but as I look through the people who got hired, it really seemed like it's one of the least significant things that the NFL teams look for in head coaches. Joe Judge, Zach Taylor, Sean McVay only had 7-8 years of experience. Kyle Shanahan had 10 years. Mike Vrabel only had 4, which some may excuse because he was a former player, which is fine because Eric Bieniemy also had a 8-year NFL career, so you can add that to his coaching experience if you would like, if you're going to do the same for Mike Vrabel, again, who only had 4. So looking at that, it's really not realistic to suggest that his total years coaching as an NFL coach is what's holding him back. Now, again, what about the Andy Reid factor? He's an offensive guy. Maybe that's what's affecting his ability to land a head coaching job. Well, let's look at Matt Nagy, a former NFL player who was an offensive coordinator under Andy Reid and the guy that Eric Bieniemy replaced. Matt Nagy had 2 years of offensive coordinator experience when he got hired. He coached the 7th ranked offense when he got hired, and he only had 12 years of NFL coaching experience when he got hired. Again, Bieniemy is better in the 2 most important categories, and objectively, I think you can say that Eric Bieniemy had the better resume. So I do think it's significant that both candidates had these same excuses, had the same what-if kind of questions about them, and still one is hired and the other one is still not a head coach. So I think that's interesting, right? Because you have Bieniemy, who was better than Matt Nagy. Now, he had Patrick Mahomes, and he had a better offense, but you can also say that it's his job to make sure Patrick Mahomes develops into the guy he has. And you can also say that Patrick Mahomes under Eric Bieniemy has been miles better than he has been under any offensive mind, and that includes current NFL head coach Cliff Kingsbury. So, yeah, you can try to use Patrick Mahomes as a negative towards Eric Bieniemy, but you also have to acknowledge that Patrick Mahomes wasn't Patrick Mahomes until Eric Bieniemy was the offensive coordinator. And see, with other coaches, they would get the credit for that, for helping, Patrick Mahomes become great. But with Bieniemy, some people try to use it as something against him, which is odd. Again, Matt Nagy, Eric Bieniemy have the same questions about themselves, had the same what ifs. If Andy Reid's carrying the throne, somehow it matters more for Eric Bieniemy than it does for Matt Nagy, which is interesting. And see, I've cut this up in many different ways. I've tried to look at this from all different angles, and there's no way that it makes sense to me based on what the owners themselves have deemed desirable in a head coaching hire by just looking at what they have hired in the last 4 years. And knowing that, it's shocking that Eric Bieniemy was passed over for 5 different head coaching jobs this season. 5. When he was probably the most qualified, most desirable candidate when you look at the criteria that these owners have set for themselves by their previous hiring decisions. Now, is this racism? Well, the reality of that question is that it's not something that can be satisfied with a flat yes or no answer. What can be said is that Eric Bieniemy, who is a black man, has a resume that is prototypical of the one that NFL teams have looked for when it comes to hiring a coordinator to be a head coach. And he was not hired, but Joe Judge and Kevin Stefanski were. So there's certainly has to be a variable at play that explains this, and race seems to be one of the variables that have factored into this decision. It's not a secret that black men have had an issue being perceived as leaders despite having resumes and backgrounds of work that would indicate such. It's something that I have even dealt with in my own personal life. Sure, it's not fair. Sure, it makes people uncomfortable when we talk about it, but it's not something that should be ignored. Now, that being said, is racism the only factor? I have no idea, because while Eric Bieniemy is being overlooked despite having a fantastic resume, the last 4 black head coach hires, Brian Flores, Steve Wilkes, Vance Joseph, and Anthony Lynn, were hired with way way less impressive resumes than what Eric Bieniemy had. So claiming it's only racism in the context of hatred rather than some kind of systemic reasoning would be a gross oversimplification of what racism is. I think a lot of people hear those claims and assume that what we're talking about is that this is some kind of concentrated, malintended effort to not hire black head coaches because we think the owners hate black people. That is not at all what I or the people who advocate for Eric Bieniemy are saying. What we are saying is that Eric Bieniemy has the perfect resume for what NFL owners have looked for in a head coaching hire in the last 4 years. A resume that puts him on the same tier as Sean McVay and Kyle Shanahan. And somehow, despite it making all of the football sense in the world, he has not been hired. And when that is the case, you have to ask yourself, what variable accounts for Eric Bieniemy that doesn't for 22 of the last 26 head coaching hires? And given the NFL's history with their lack of black head coaches currently in the league, despite a majority of their player base being black, what other variable is more reasonable to blame? Other coordinators have had strong head coaches in their specialized field and got a job. Other coordinators have had an MVP quarterback and gotten hired. So if there is a better guess as to why Eric Bieniemy is not hired that does not factor in race, I'd love to hear it. But for right now, there's really not a better solution out there. Now, lastly, because I am a black man, and this is a video dealing with the racial undertones of head coach hires, there will be some people who come across this video and claim that me bringing up race itself is divisive, or me sharing my experience as a black man is divisive, when in reality, the last thing I'm trying to do is divide us. I'm trying to share my unique experiences of what I've dealt with because of my race to try to bring us closer together. And to those people who wish to make that claim, my response is this: my race is not divisive. Me sharing my experience is not divisive. How you choose to react to my race and experience is what divides us. Now, to the people who watch the video and understand, let's talk football. So tell me in the comment section, what do you think, or what job do you think Eric Bieniemy should have gotten, or do you think he should have gotten a job? I think that the Giants should have hired him. Daniel Jones, Saquon Barkley would have been a dangerous combination. You can make the argument for the Browns. You can make an argument for him a lot of places. He's a very qualified candidate, but I think he could bring an innovative scheme to somewhere like New York. And do you think Eric Bieniemy will be hired next season? So let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below. Thank you guys for watching. Have a great day. Have a good night.